Hey y'all, Coast to Coast Podcast coming at you, live edition of the show tonight. Appreciate everybody who's joining us live on a Sunday evening. Hope you have had a great week, that your spring is off to a phenomenal start, and we appreciate you making time for us. If you're not watching us live, hey, we're glad you're here anyway, and glad that we are part of your podcast consumption habits. I'm Joey Powell for Inside Carolina. We're brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt. With me as always, Sherrell, McMillan, Sean Moran, the two guys who bring the heat, who swing the lumber, who whatever other sports idiom you want to throw in there, I will accept it. But they're here. They're going to help try to lead yours truly through a show and see if we can't give you guys some relevant updates and give you a little bit of nuggets that kind of have developed on and off, some a little more deeply than others since we last saw you a few weeks ago. And I think the first thing we'd like to jump out at, because there hasn't been any real IC discussion from us about it, is Jaydon Young committing to North Carolina a few weeks ago. It was kind of quiet. It kind of happened overnight. But Jaydon Young is a guard. He's 6'4". He's actually from Goldsboro. And I'm sorry if you're from North Carolina. He's actually from Goldsboro. He is averaged a little over 8 points a game last year and just under 2 rebounds. Shot about 35% from the field. But transferring to North Carolina, Sherrell, I know you hate the term depth piece. So tell me about Jaydon Young and how this became a transfer to North Carolina without using the words depth piece.
If I can unmute, can you hear me? All right, great way to start this week. Probably is how it's going to go. I start off with, can you hear me? So with Jaydon, he grew up a Carolina fan. I think he's made no secret about that. And Carolina actually recruited him a little bit before Hubert Davis became the head coach. Steve Robinson, when he was an assistant, called him a few times. He was at Greensboro Day, which we all know is a very has a high reputation as a school. They're always good, usually great head coach. Guys know how to play basketball. So Carolina looked at him some, but opted not to pursue him, and he ended up at Virginia Tech. And I don't know if you remember, but we were doing one of the previews talking about how tough it is to play at Blacksburg. And one of the things we said was like, hey, this Jaydon Young kid, he hasn't had a great season, but he's had 2 really good games in a row. Like, watch out for him. And he didn't play well against UNC. But he entered the portal after the end of the season. Virginia Tech obviously had a tough year with Mike Young, and he wanted to go, I guess, down a level. He wanted to be close to home, and the only interest he got was really from High Point. And High Point was like, hey, you can come in, you can be the guy, have the ball in your hand, do everything you want to do. We want you. And High Point has a lot of money. So from a salary perspective, that was a good shot. So it had everything it wanted. Close to home, good salary. He was going to be the guy. And then their head coach left like the day after he committed to be the head coach in waiting at Creighton, Coach Huss. And I think that kind of, rocked, I don't want to say rocked his world a little bit, but kind of changed things a little bit, because he was still going to commit there and stay with High Point. But the new head coach started to get other commitments, started to talk to other guards. And he's like, well, if I'm going to compete, I might as well compete, at the highest level, which is back in the ACC. And North Carolina kind of got word, put feelers out. And obviously he's someone who wants to be at UNC. And I think that was a big piece of it, was that when you are turning over a roster with 7 or 8 or 9 guys every year, you need someone who has that connection to the program, someone who grew up watching it, someone who, frankly wants to be there and probably won't leave to go somewhere else because he does have eligibility remaining. So I think all of that combined, plus North Carolina did need a guard additionally, and they did need someone with experience, someone who could score, and someone who's done it at an ACC level. So you add all that together, and I think it was kind of a perfect fit, and it came together. Again, Jaydon Young is not an RJ Davis replacement. He's not an Ian Jackson replacement, but he
I
is
love you
someone
for
who
that so much.
but it's true, but he is someone who can come in, and if he's your 3rd or 4th guard, I think you're feeling pretty solid, because he has shown that he can score at the ACC level and that his best basketball is probably still in front of him. The numbers aren't great at all, but I think you're hoping with the rest of the roster that this is a player who's still ascending, because he does have some of the raw talent and the skills that you look for, and the hope is that in a better situation he'll be a better player.
Let's segue into that. Sean, why don't you give me your scout on Jaydon Young? And I know we mentioned him, like Sherrell said, briefly before North Carolina played in Blacksburg towards the end of the season, but Give me your scout on him and what you see that jumps out at you when you're watching him on film.
I think the most positive thing is just his burst. When he catches on the wing, he has the ability to get by, to move quickly off the dribble, 1-2 dribbles to get into the lane. Not somebody that is going to in like Ian Jackson be able to isolate you and drive by off of a first step, but the quickness I think is a little underrated. And when we were talking about him going into that Virginia Tech game, as Sherrell mentioned, he just had 1 or 2 games and 1 or 2 good games. And over the last 6 games, he was in double figures all those games, 2 games of 20 plus points. Uh, didn't shoot the ball at all in terms of the ACC tournament. And you look at his 3-point percentage, high volume, 151 attempts. So would have been number 2 or number 3 at UNC, right around what Ian Jackson had this year. And he was 0 for 11 in his last game, which will definitely plummet the percentages. But I think with him improving towards the end of that sophomore year, I think you're looking at a guy that should be able to contribute and then ideally build up. And if you're looking at him from, hey, here's a guy that started in the ACC, was playing 25 plus minutes a game, and he was improving at the end of the year as he became really a go-to scorer for Virginia Tech, that I would want to count on him as a reliable presence off the bench. Sherrell mentioned really no matter what type of traditional numbers or analytic or advanced numbers you're looking at, the stats were pretty bad both offensively and defensively. But I think with more talented teammates around him, he should be a pretty steady presence off the bench, given offensively what he's able to do. Probably bring down the 3-point volume, still utilize his ability at the wing, either running around screens off ball or putting pressure on the defense. And then defensively, I think the hope is that with that size and strength, I feel UNC hasn't really had many 6'4", 200 plus pound guards or wings in a while. So ideally that the size and strength can improve from a deflection and just a pressure perspective defensively, so that if he's playing anywhere from 10 to 18, even 20 minutes a game, that he's producing at a ACC level.
And what Sean talked about, he kind of became the de facto go-to scorer for Virginia Tech. We always talk about kind of what your role is going to be on a specific team and what you're capable of. And I think they maybe asked a little bit more of him than he was ready to do, or that maybe he was capable of. And that's okay, because, in Carolina, the hope is that they'll have other guys who will be the primary scorers, and then you can have him as someone who can assist. I would say, in that night game at Virginia on a Tuesday night, third in 5 days, when maybe your 1A or your 2A or your 3A aren't playing as well from a scoring perspective, he can come in and give you 10 quick points off the bench or something like that. So I think maybe as his role clarifies and he goes from a number 1 to maybe a number 4 or a number 5, that offensively I'm talking, I think that maybe is more in line with who he is right now. And who's to say that in 2 years he's not something better? But at minimum, I mean, you can do a lot worse than finding a 6'4" guard who loves UNC, who has not a ton, but has a lot of experience playing in the ACC to be a reserve guard. I mean, there's a lot worse situations.
And real quick, I just saw in the chat a question about is DeMarco Dunn a good comparison? And I think he's better as a sophomore than DeMarco Dunn was. And when you look at what DeMarco did at Penn State of getting up to 8.4 points per game as a senior, I think there's ideally it would be a DeMarco plus to an extent coming off the bench and what he can offer, especially if a guard does get injured or they're having off game or foul trouble. Once again, we're asking another player to be able to take a jump, but I do think there is that opportunity and the ability from Jaydon to be able to step into that if the situation presents itself.
I think it'll be interesting too, like you said, Sean. I think it might be an opportunity where he can come in and be a neutral to plus defender for North Carolina as a bench player. And that's something typically you don't see around the league, is guys that can come off the bench and be a steadying defensive presence, or at least not hurt you defensively. And that's something I think North Carolina struggled with over the last few years.
Yeah, he's built like a tight end. I mean, you
Absolutely.
look at it. I mean, he's obviously doesn't have that kind of weight, but just from a stockiness and an athletic perspective, you would think he can come in and harass guys. What did we say about Seth Trimble all last year? Like, especially his sophomore year, but like, come in, be the dude who harasses people, gets on people's nerves, use your strengths to get up in people defensively and tire them out, and then let the other unit come in and kind of finish the job. So I think that's a great point, Joey, that he can definitely come in and do that.
Well, I think there was also a template laid out last year with North Carolina. And granted, it's going to be different without R.J. Davis and Elliot Cadeau. But there is something to see or something to be said with the way North Carolina made their comebacks in games last year, with how that aggression and that willingness to jump in the passing lanes and willingness to wall guys off was able to help them trigger their offense. Moving on, there's a couple of other random names that I think folks have heard or bandied about. Sherrell was able to confirm two of them. Dame Sarr and Ivan Karchenkov, two players that North Carolina has, are supposedly on North Carolina's radar. Sherrell, give me a little bit of that and how, I guess, what you know about the seriousness or the depth of those discussions. And then I want Sean to kind of give us a brief 30,000 foot view over what those two players present on the court.
Yeah, and post Jaron Stevenson commitment, honestly, it's dwindled the amount of talk and kind of chatter around UNC, and I definitely think that's purposeful. If you haven't followed UNC or this coaching staff, really, with parts of it under Hubert Davis, and then most of these guys were under Roy Williams as well. Just they don't talk to a lot of people. They don't put stuff out there. I mean, I could tell stories about other coaches calling recruiting writers head coaches and being like, "Hey, we're recruiting this player, or this player is about to commit," and that's just not how UNC operates at all. They are very much the NSA of college basketball programs. Let's put it that way. So since then, like I said, it's been quiet. We knew about Andre Stojakovic and how they were, kind of talking to him. He was the immediate pivot. Kind of once some other things opened up and some additional resources became available. Since then, it's been really tough to confirm names, and those two really kind of had to squeeze out of nothing. We were kind of in the desert and we found a cactus and we just squeezed it and got a little bit of water out of it. But those are the two names. I think Karchinkov is probably a little more serious than Sar, just because Sar is further along the process than Karchinkov is. I think I'm saying it right. Sar really, from pretty much everyone in the industry, Kansas and Oregon, Eric Bossy, 24/7's national recruiting director, kind of mentioned that Oregon and Kansas were pretty far along with him. And the expectation was they probably had a better shot than some of the other schools. But then again, Illinois and Duke were two schools who were on him very early, and they went in different directions. So obviously this portal stuff can change very quickly. I guess he's technically not a portal kid, but recruiting in this period can change very quickly. But right now it seems like he's a little further off than Karchenkov, who we know that UNC at least has had a Zoom call with and presumably had more conversations. But the only thing we can confirm is that UNC is interested in those two and that they had a Zoom call with Karchenkov. I know that's not what people want to hear, but that's all we're able to confirm at the moment.
And again, to reiterate, and this isn't ripping on anybody else, but I see standard practice is to be able to vet and confirm these from at least two reputable sources. So the fact that we can't confirm more doesn't mean more hasn't happened, just means Sherrell hasn't been able to confirm them from folks that we trust.
What was it we used to say? Silence doesn't equal inaction.
Silence does not equal inactivity.
Yeah. It was like, that was a podcast title a couple of years ago. But again, that's just how Carolina operates. They're not gonna put stuff on billboards and say, "Hey, we're recruiting this kid." That's just not how they do things.
And just because people want to know, and this isn't a knock on our subscribers because we appreciate all of y'all, but just because you want to know and just because you've got a hankering to hear doesn't mean North Carolina is going to satiate that in any way, shape, or form. Trust me, if Sherrell and General Sherman haven't been able to crack the code's probably not getting cracked. Sean, give me, again, I don't want to spend too much time on these guys because we have no idea. It's not very far at this point, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on the show about them. But if you could, give me 30, 45 seconds on each guy so that our listeners and viewers can understand what we're talking about.
Sure, we'll start with Sar, even though he might be the more unrealistic option. He's the one that screams NBA starter slash high level potential in the NBA, just given his build from 6'7" wing, close to 7 foot wingspan, ability to play probably the 2 through 4 defensively. He's played with FC Barcelona, so right now really a top 4 team internationally. So he's been playing in the Spanish division, which is probably one of the or top 2 just from a national perspective, as well as EuroLeague, and getting minutes. And not to mention he played at the Hoop Summit and had around 17 points there. So he would be looking at, if he was in the recruiting class, top 5 to 7 type talent in my mind, and a one and done guy that could have a long NBA career. But he would be a guy that can shoot it. He doesn't have high volume in terms of shooting, but he's shot it at a good percentage. But really as a slasher finisher at the rim, and almost a Drake clone from that size and length perspective on the wing defensively. So I think whoever does get him, they have a very high lottery talent coming in. In terms of Ivan, different, still playing EuroLeague, playing for Bayern Munich in Germany. So maybe more of a top 5 league overall, but probably one of the better leagues overseas. Same thing from a EuroLeague perspective. Bayern Munich, probably a notch below FC Barcelona, but and he's been with that system the past few years and has been getting solid minutes. He's a very solidly built, moves well off the ball, can shoot it. His percentages probably don't show that as much, and the free throw percentage is definitely a little concerning given the fluctuations and all the different levels that he's played. But good rebounder, good passing vision, and once again, a guy that should be able to put up 10, 12 points in the college game. Where he would slot in at UNC, I think he could be a good complement to Powell, but also add another depth piece at that 2/3 position if he were to come over from Germany and Bayern Munich.
Mute that man. He said depth piece.
He
Mute
did
him
say
for
depth
10
piece.
seconds.
I mean,
He said depth piece.
Ding. I don't know. We'll come back to you eventually. But Sean makes a great point about the clubs that players play at overseas. And I want to try to give a little bit of context for folks tuning in. If you don't follow overseas ball a lot, the club that the players play at often speaks volumes of what their potential is, because they have better scouting staffs. They have deeper roots, around the entire continent to be able to look in and see where they want to invest their money. So if you want to look at a model, look at, Bayern Munich that he references also has a soccer club. But if you want to look at kind of European soccer / football, that'll give you an idea about how deep their scouting goes and how much breadth it has when they start bringing players up through their system to play there. So I love that Sean is so up on these teams. I think it's good for folks to think about, but the better club that a player plays at usually is an indicator of what their ceiling may be, because the better clubs usually have players with higher ceilings, if that makes sense.
And I think a interesting piece of this is just given for players like this playing at those type of clubs, we haven't had these conversations, but obviously how the money has completely changed where college basketball is. All of a sudden, if you're looking at Bayern Munich, for instance, there might be 1 or 2 guys in that high 6 figures, close to $1 million, but realistically, probably in that 400 to 600 range, which in Germany is the highest level you're going to get, and EuroLeague probably in that middle. And now college teams are blowing these EuroLeague teams out of the water in terms of what they can present from a financial option. So now all of a sudden the guys that have been groomed by these top organizations over the years are now opportunities for college coaches to come recruit versus continuing to play at Bayern Munich and then going in the NBA draft. So it does open some opportunities. And I think for the two that we're talking about, very different in terms of what that top level potential is, but in terms of being able to contribute right away, both of them would, just in different aspects.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. Also, folks should consider, Sean threw out the number between 400 and 600K. $500,000 right now will, fill out a roster for a lot of top programs. Yeah, I mean, there are guys that are non-contributors that are getting that much right now on the open market. So that's something to think about. And that's, again, something to frame when you're considering that some of these middle or larger tier club players are starting to sniff college basketball. Do want to throw another name out there. Zev Seneska. If any of you guys are watching us live and want to check him out, Zev Seneska, Senesca. Somebody else that's on North Carolina's radar. You might be able to find out a little bit more. Obviously, if we can get more information about that player, we'll share it with folks relatively soon. But Zev Seneska, a good one to look into specifically as we come to you today on the 4th of May. Sherrell, I want to go to some former North Carolina players that are now getting a little bit of love, specifically Drake Powell getting an NBA Combine invite and RJ Davis getting invited to the GLeague Elite Camp. I don't think anybody's shocked by Drake Powell getting the Combine invite, but can you explain a little bit about what that means with regard to how he'll be able to liaise with NBA teams, how he'll be able to start officially with his process of, transitioning to the next phase of his career? What does that look like when you get a Combine invite? And then what are the other pieces that come with that?
Well, the workouts actually can start now. Like, I was having lunch with someone who works for an NBA team, and he was like, "Yeah, we're having a few guys in next week to work out." So that can start irrespective of when the Combine begins. But what'll happen is they'll go to the Combine. And it's not that dissimilar, I would say, from the NFL Combine. You'll go. There's games. There's drills, and there's testing, and there's interviews, there's all that good stuff. And what happens a lot of time, honestly, is guys have a good workout. Usually the agencies will put on individual or like workouts for their entire agency while they're there. So there might be a Moran, sports agency workout, and then there might be a Joey Powell sports agency workout. And they've been trained to do all the drills and everything that the teams are looking for. And a lot of times what'll happen, honestly, is guys will get promises at the Combine. I think Kobe White was one where he did interviews. He played maybe one game while he was there, and then he left. And everybody was like, "Why? Why is he leaving? What's going on?" Well, it's because Chicago was like, "Hey, you're not going to get past, what was he, eight or nine? You're not going to get past 8 or 9." I think Day'Ron Sharpe did something very similar when he was there as well. So for Drake, it's really going to be just honestly, I think it's going to be showing that he can initiate offense. It's going to be the biggest thing for him, because that's the question that most NBA teams have. They're okay with his, how he shot this past year, because when he was open, he made it. But I think I read somewhere that 100% of his 3-pointers were assisted. So that shows no, on ball creation. So he's going to have to show that. He's going to have to show that he can kind of match up athletically with some of these guys who are going into the NBA. And if he's able to do that, then I think it's a jumping off point for, additional workouts, because once you perform there, you do what you're supposed to do, and then you can start having, or you can't, I want to say start having, but that's when the serious workouts, I think, really start from there. So it's really about showing well. It's about interviewing well. I think his personality will shine through. For him in particular, it's about kind of showing that he can do some things offensively without assists, without somebody, kind of feeding him, do it on his own. And then from there, you go and you meet with teams and interview with teams, and then he'll be off on the circuit of flying to Milwaukee and Brooklyn and wherever else to talk to their people in person and do kind of in-person workouts.
I really was expecting you to go on a nice litany of mid-market team names there, but I appreciate that you stopped at Brooklyn. Shout out to everybody in the backflip.
I started to, but then I was like, maybe I'm saying too much. I didn't want some information, so right. Just had to stop.
Because people are in like that Uber read between the lines mode right now, so I got you.
And I'm curious to see how he'll just from a. I know he'll test well just from a height and length perspective, but some of the agility drills and vertical and just seeing how he does stack up from that perspective will be interesting.
So Sean, stay here. I want you to tell everybody what's different about the GLeague the G League Elite Camp. Tell us a little bit about where RJ is going to be going for that, what that process looks like, and what potential doors it may or may not open for his trajectory, and what his next steps in his path might be.
Yeah, it's almost a stepping ladder from it. Starts a few weeks ago with Portsmouth, and some of those players will get invited to the G League Elite Camp. RJ and Caleb Love are both in the G League Elite Camp. And then usually in the past few years, maybe 4 to 6 players that play well in that G League Elite Camp will get invited to the combine. So it's almost a stepping stone. Jaron Stevenson participated in this last year, as did a lot of players that came back to school. But it's in Chicago. They've done a better job of kind of, bringing more to the G League Elite Camp than what it was even 4 or 5 years ago, and how it is integrated with the NBA and their testing system. But they're going to go through a lot of the same testing, physically, athletically, shooting wise, and then they're going to, I think, each have 2 to 4 2 games a day. I remember a few years ago, obviously watching some of the UNC potential portal candidates, Pete Nance being one of them in the G League Elite Camp, and how are they doing there? So RJ, I think it'll be good because he was, Sherrell, correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of testing, never went through anything like this before. He was always back in school pretty early. So it'll be good to see. Once again, he's not going to jump out from the physical and the testing perspective, but if he's able to handle the ball, knock down threes, and deliver just playing point guard in these, maybe he could earn a spot. But for the most part, these guys, some will earn two-way, but for the most part, they're going to be kind of that two-way G League type prospect over the next year or two.
Y'all remember when Portsmouth was like a huge deal? Remember that when like the Portsmouth camp was like a big deal, and it was almost appointment television on NBA TV for a little bit. I do. I remember. Pepperidge Farm remembers. So something else I want to throw it out to the audience, and Sherrell, you can elaborate if you'd like to. The process these guys are going through right now has a lot to do with who, if anyone, North Carolina adds to the roster from the transfer portal for the next little while, correct? If anyone. Again, I want to throw that caveat out there so that people aren't trying to add things into what you're about to say.
Yeah, potentially. Obviously, Drake Powell would be welcome back with open arms, and there would be a spot for him no matter what. I think the rest kind of remains to be seen, and it's kind of a case-by-case situation. So I don't know, say they get a commitment from someone at a certain position tomorrow or Tuesday. I don't know how that would impact people not named Drake Powell. I think that's still something we're trying to figure out. But the only one I know for sure that if someone were to commit tomorrow and then kind of be welcomed back would be Drake Powell. After that, I'm not sure if that makes sense. That didn't come out as smoothly as I wanted, but I think the point is Drake Powell has a spot no matter what. If he decides he wants to come back, they will find a way to make sure Drake Powell is back. If they get a commitment from someone else tomorrow, I can't say the same thing for anybody else who might pull out of the draft. Does that make sense? Okay.
So Sherrell, for me, that would be anybody that did not play at UNC that they could be potentially looking at.
Correct. That would make sense.
Okay.
And again, the other thing too, I know people want us. Let's just talk about the elephant in the room while we're here. Let's just go ahead and broach the subject. I know folks want us to talk about money and talk about who's getting what, because it does have a very Woj Shams feel to it, an off season of just learning about the numbers and figuring out who's getting what. The issue is that it's very difficult to do and to put your head around exactly who's getting what. I'll give you an example. There was a player at UNC who I think we had a pretty good feel for what that person might be getting for as far as financial considerations. But we asked, I would say, about 4 different people who are as close to this as you could probably get. And they gave us different answers about the salary. So it's like if the people who are doing this, who are very involved, aren't 100% sure, then how can we report with,
Yeah.
pretty with certainty of what someone might be asking for or what someone is getting? Because it's all leverage play, and in this business, kind of like everybody lies to each other in order to get more information. So it's tough, and that's one of the reasons that we've stayed away from like actually trying to nail down and say, this is how much Joey Powell is going to make this year in salary, or this is how much Sean Moran is going to make, because it's very hard to get real confirmed, multiple confirmed numbers from people who are close to the situation. Because, like I said, we had an example where the people close to the situation didn't agree on the number. So that's one reason we've stayed away from it. But that is going to be an important piece, obviously, is how much can Carolina pay to some of these guys who might withdraw from the draft? How much can they pay to people coming from overseas? And then with what's left, can they add any other pieces? And I would say all that is fluid, all that changes. So there's no certain amount that's just sitting in a pot somewhere. That's not really how this works. It's just kind of it's not fun to think about, but it just kind of moves and goes as it will. And that's not a great answer, but that's kind of how this works.
Well, I want to kind of dig in on that a little bit because I see some folks in the chat, and shout out to the 400 or so of you that are here tonight. Just because North Carolina is a public university, you're correct in that they do have to disclose employee salaries. As of right now, on May the 4th, player NIL deals are not technically called salaries. That's not to say that might not change tomorrow. And Sherrell said a second ago, somebody mentioned earlier before we even came on the air, asked in the chat, how does North Carolina compete with Kentucky, who's spending north of $20 million? Don't believe every number you see, y'all. I don't know another way to say that, but because it's just such a fluid situation and nobody's going to go on a record with what any player is being paid anywhere. Really all of these numbers are coming from friends of agents, friends of players, because you're not going to get an agent or a player or anybody from a staff to really go on a record with an individual number. So with that said, does that mean that some of these numbers that are bandied around aren't close to accurate? I mean, they absolutely could be. But before you just see something and immediately run with it the way you would an NBA or a Major League Baseball or an NFL salary, pump the brakes a second, take a step back, and then realize, yeah, this is probably inflated for some reason or another. So all that to say, could player salaries be, public very soon? Maybe, but I think that's more along the lines of the fact that so much around this landscape is changing more than anybody has to disclose anything. And Brett Weeks just asking the chat, do they have to pay taxes? It's income. So I would hope that somebody's advising these guys to pay those taxes, because that was a big issue when NIL was first broached. Was how are players going to understand the financial literacy side of this to be able to pay what Uncle Sam's going to ask for from them? So just hang tight. Again, the way this stuff changes, when I say it's fluid, and Sherrell says it's fluid, and Sean says it's fluid, that's probably me sandbagging as much as I can, because it really is changing by the hour, and in some cases even more frequently than that. And then when you start considering the larger picture and how it plays out with the national landscape, understand that it is probably moving maybe at a slower pace, a slower pace, but it is moving very rapidly and continuously.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Judge Wilkin, who is presiding over the House case.
Yes.
That's been delayed for a few weeks, and a lot of these deals were done with the idea that House was coming and that it needed to be done before House settled. And once the settlement didn't get approved, then the market started doing what it did last year, where players who signed later because of the diminishing number of guys available, their salary started just skyrocketing. I mean, there are numbers that you hear, some been able to get close to confirming, that are just, they're astronomical, but you're worth what somebody's going to pay you. And if somebody's going to pay me $3.5, $4 million, $4.5 million to come in and play for your program, of course I'm going to take it. Why wouldn't I? I'd be dumb not to. So there's that part of it. And then there is the aspect that the government, I think the president has talked about it. Some folks in Congress have talked about it, of trying to come up with a way to regulate what would be traditional NIL, which would be actually like Joey Powell summer camp or Sean Moran, batting instructing school or whatever. So there's just a whole bunch of things that could change this, tomorrow, or change it in 2 weeks. And so for now, it's just going to be a situation where most guys are going to go to the highest bidder because there's no regulation. But I do think there'll be some form of regulation. But really, and not to get too deep into it, this is just the death by 1,000 cuts until the players and the schools
Collectively bargain.
collectively bargain
Yep.
and the players become employees. Until then, like there's going to come a time, and again, sorry to go on a tangent, but there's going to come a time when Moran is going to be in his 7th year playing basketball at Carolina. He's going to be, you know what? Why can't I play 10 years at Carolina? Where's the restriction? Why is that legal? And Sean's going to sue. And Sean, based upon
Will
what
likely win.
the courts, based upon what the courts have said, Sean will likely win, and he'll have unlimited eligibility. That's next. Like we're already going to have 5th year eligibility. That's coming. Somebody's going to say, why stop at 5? Why not 8? Why not 10? And so anything that limits player freedom because they're not employees is going to get struck down by the courts. So it's just going to keep going and keep going until this is collectively bargained, they're employees, and it moves forward. But until then, you're just going to get this slow grind of stuff coming out.
Also,
which
want
I
to
think the 5th year, in my opinion, that's where I think the tides, if that does happen to pass, the tides will turn, and there'll be a lot of pushback from more so than what we've seen, because I think it is a slippery slope where, you know, we're talking about 18-year-old international guys, you know, could easily be talking about 27-year-old international guys. So, and I think that would completely ruin the college game more so than what everybody.
Also want to jump back on something Sherrell McMillan said. The Sean Moran batting camp is great. I mean, it's a hit. So if you guys want to get your kids signed up for that, get in touch with Sean. Something else is a hit is Johnny T-shirt. Johnny T-shirt, amazing haberdasher of fine Tar Heels such as yourself. That's right. You listening to the show, you watching the show, you know how much Johnny T-shirt loves you. You know how much we love Johnny T-shirt. We want you to love Johnny T-shirt back. JohnnyT-shirt.com. If you're a premium subscriber, you know that you can use that extra 10% on your checkout that you find on the message boards and use that code and get an extra 10% off. Who doesn't like to save money, right? And I haven't been able to confirm this, but I would assume that Johnny T-shirt is going to have no off season this summer either. So if you're sending your kid up there for camp, hit them up, go in, see them, tell them we sent you, tell them the Coast to Coast podcast is big fans of theirs and sent you to come re-up your closet, and they'll take care of you. I promise. JohnnyT-shirt.com. Visit them. Use the premium code found on the message boards. You will be so glad you did. We'll be right back. If you're listening to us on a podcast, there'll be some national ads that drop in here for a second. If you're watching on TV, just stick around. Nothing's going to change for you. Joey Powell, Coast to Coast podcast for InsideCarolina.com. Sherrell McMillan, Sean Moran have joined me. I am glad that they are here. A couple of quick shout outs. Shout out to Eric Chetwood, listener to the show. Met him on the baseball diamond the other night. Our kids were playing an intra-city scrimmage from South Durham Little League against Bull City Little League. And Eric is a coach for the Bull City Reds. So it was nice to meet him. Appreciate him listening to the show. And also want to shout out to MC Taylor and the guys over at His Golden Messenger. Really phenomenal band. They did some great work for my full-time gig. Did a benefit show for us last night. So just want to give some love and put some good vibes out into the universe there for those folks. All right, last thing I think we want to talk about tonight that would be worth really digging into. Sherrell had hinted at it for quite some time about Zayden High rejoining North Carolina basketball team. You've seen the report that came out in the News Observer about what happened with Zayden High, and kind of there were some rumblings a while back about kind of what had transpired. We have not spoken on the actual issues. We have not spoken about what he's been alleged of doing. I want to stay away from that, not because I don't think it's a serious or discussion worthy matter. I just don't think that we can accomplish anything on this show by bringing it up. What I do want to talk about is what Zayden High being back on the basketball team means for North Carolina. So, Sean, I'm going to come to you first. I realized that we didn't see much of Zayden High the season before last when he was a true freshman. But how can you position how he may, I guess, ease into this coming lineup, assuming that he does everything he needs to do to get back on the roster? What do you think he brings to North Carolina's post depth or post ability as he rejoins the team?
Well, going back to his actual freshman year, yeah, we did not get to see much of him, and when he was in the game, it was only spot minutes or seconds at best. I think with Van Allen Lubin going into the portal, we had talked about the influx or the surplus of guys at that 4 and 5 position. With him leaving, you have Vasar, and then really from a 5 perspective, James Brown. So while you have Vasar and Stevenson and Caleb Wilson at that 4 or 5 to kind of fit 3 people into 2 over time, I wouldn't want to put Stevenson at the 5 most likely, although I think that could be an option. But it does give you a little more depth at that 5-4 or 4-5 position. I think going back to his coming into Chapel Hill, he was that 4-5, 5-4, strong on the boards, potential decent shot blocker. He was a high volume 3-point shooter in AAU that did not shoot it well, but going back to that period of time, 2022, a lot of those shots were NBA type range or quick, quick shot. So when he was set and when he was closer to the 3-point line, he was a decent 3-point shooter in AAU play. Once again, I don't think you want Zayden High jacking 3+3s a game, but I think he does provide some more wiggle room for Hubert Davis if Vasar did get into foul trouble or if they were going against a true center. So usually if we're just looking at his traditional freshman to sophomore year jump, you're probably going to expect him to be playing in the 5 to 12 minutes per game. But once again, looking at the freshman year stats, there's not a lot to project and say, oh, I think he can do this better. But given the lack of Van Allen Lubin, there will be some minutes at that 5 off the bench for somebody to fill in.
And I'll go ahead and answer for Sherrell before I throw it to him. The expectation is that Van Allen Lubin will not be back with North Carolina. I think he made that pretty clear in the podcast he did when Lubin entered the transfer portal. Sherrell, is there anything that you feel like would change what Sean said about Zayden High's potential contribution on the basketball court? Do you think that there's maybe something that maybe folks are missing, or maybe people are just being too anticipatory about the positives that he might have back? I mean, the guy's been away from basketball for a year, and I understand that he's been training and so on and so forth, but that ain't the same as playing ACC games. So, Sherrell, I'm going to ask you, what is different that maybe Sean didn't mention? Or, I'd like to say Sean's spot on, but I'm trying to get you guys to disagree for once in a while.
No, he's probably spot on. I think the larger conversation is you bring in a guy like James Brown to develop. And, it looked like for a while that he was either going to be the third center. I guess he was going to be the third center if Van Allen Lubin returned, because Van Allen Lubin can't really play the 4. And then they signed Stevenson, so he definitely wouldn't be playing the 4. So why not give the chance to the guy who's been around the program, who's been practicing, who's earned it, who has seemed like a leader from some folks in the locker room. Granted, didn't play a ton at all as a freshman, but if you believe in him and you brought him in because you thought he could contribute, and the goal is to develop guys, and we always go back to the Coach Smith saying of freshman to sophomore, then I think it's feasible that you could say that maybe James Brown could become the serviceable backup to Henry Vasar, that he could be the one to play those 10 to 12 minutes a game, that he could be the one who comes in and gives a spark with a couple of offensive rebounds and a put back or something like that. I would say more so than anything about Zayden, because you just don't know, because he hasn't played in so long. And then as a freshman, he didn't play much either. So he really hasn't played much since his senior year in high school. And then to be honest, his senior year in high school, he didn't play a lot because of the team he was on. So we're talking about a guy who hasn't played much ball over the last 3 years, versus Brown, who's been there, and by all accounts, is a great kid doing all the right things. So why not give him a shot first to kind of earn those minutes and see what happens? All things considered, I think he's probably better in the paint, probably just as aggressive. Doesn't have the versatility that High has displayed at times as far as shooting from the perimeter and those things. But I think Brown could be a serviceable backup. And then if Brown is the backup five, and then you presume that Stevenson and Wilson will handle the four, then you kind of have a really balanced depth chart. And High can come in and kind of get back, I guess, get his win back and get back used to being with the team, and then maybe contribute down the line. But I think I'm not the coach, but I would start with just really pouring into James Brown in the hopes that he can take a leap and become what you're looking for behind Vasar.
Real quick, just on Sherrell's comment of when he last played. This goes back to, I remember watching in person the Kansas City EYBL in 2022, and that was watching Zayden High in person. That was watching Drake Powell before he had a UNC offer and before he, back when he was ranked in the 40s and 50s. So it was a long time ago since he was getting 30 plus minutes or just serviceable time in games.
Yeah, I've told the story so many times, but like I think I saw the game of Zayden High's life. It was 4 days after Carolina lost to Kansas in the national championship game. And obviously the GG Jackson stuff was going on, and Carolina didn't know what he was going to do at the time. He obviously ended up committing. But they watched Zayden High, and he came out and he looked like the future of big men. Like he hit like 7 threes, had 14 or 15 rebounds, and you thought, man, this kid is going to be kind of amazing. And it just never really lived up to that weekend. Now that weekend got him a lot of offers and eventually got him on Carolina's radar, which when GG Jackson decommitted, got him at Carolina. But hasn't been that player since. And that was it'll be 3.5 years from the first game in November, from that game in April of 2022. And he just hasn't hasn't developed over that time. So I guess the answer is we'll see. He's a redshirt sophomore. So we'll see. But like I said, were I leading the situation, I would pour into James Brown and really boost his confidence and see if he could become kind of that fourth guy in the post rotation.
All right, fellas. Before we get out of here, I do want to take one question. She's been blowing us up in the chat, so I'm not asking the question because she asked a lot tonight. I think it's a good question. I think it's one for us to discuss. Sean and Sherrell. Sean, I'll let you go first just because you're farther away than Sherrell is. Melinda Dolphin asks, which one of our players have the greatest potential to make a summer leap? Sean, I think that's a lot of things that folks in kind of that tune into this show, but just UNC fans in general are really wondering, especially with a team that, as we've laid out, has, I guess, really been relied on going into the offseason for its upside. And the gamble that comes behind a lot of these players. Sean, give me which one of those guys you think has the most potential to make the big summer jump that we've seen happen before.
Well, I think we're banking on pretty much everybody making that summer leap, which is a little scary, but we'll probably go with the most risk-free option. And we're talking about anybody on the team, right? Or anybody that is currently on the roster.
Sean, you can answer this however you'd like to answer this.
Then I'm going to go with Vasar, just because we spent a lot of time talking about how he could be you look at him, what he did last year at Arizona, very efficient, but from a minutes perspective, it wasn't until the end of the year. So still very unproven despite all the financial means that were put into him. But I think from how he could be used to offset some of the lack of the guard's strengths or experience from a playmaking perspective, as well as his just versatility and agility at that 7 foot. I would put it on him to making that leap as a redshirt junior. And then I also think Powell, just given all his minutes that he did play at West Virginia, I think has probably the guy we talk about the least right now, but as things fit, could be the starting 3 or at least that 6 man. And nice stroke, shot at a high volume, and I think athletically can do a little bit more than what was shown.
Thanks, Sean. I asked for 1 and you took 2. So
no problem, Joey.
I know you're absolutely just gobbling up Sherrell's potential answers over there. So Sherrell, blame your co-analyst for absolutely butchering what's going on with your potential for answers here, but I'll ask you the same question. Sean, I'm just messing with you. I love you, man. Which player has the greatest potential to make the big summer league?
I'm gonna answer it by asking you the question. Who
Come
last
on.
year when this question was asked last year? Who did I say
You said
over
Seth
and
Trimble.
over again?
You said Seth
No,
Trimble.
I said Elliot Cadeau.
Oh, you said Elliot
But
Cadeau. Hey, you said Elliot Cadeau.
but
Remember that when you said Elliot Cadeau last summer? Remember that?
yeah, there you go. There you go. I gave you a softball. You didn't hit it out of the park. Just a C and I double. So it's Seth Trimble, and I think the answer to this question, or every iteration of this question over the next 6 months, the answer is going to be Seth Trimble, because he has shown that he can be. Let me back up a little bit. I think the Seth Trimble discourse has gotten a little bit out of hand. Like, yes, he has deficits. There are things he can improve on, but just reading some of the comments about him, you would think that he's just some scrub who's never done anything of consequence in his entire career. And I vehemently disagree with that. He was basically the second leading scorer. I think he was like a tenth of a point behind Ian Jackson last year. He was the second leading rebounder on the team last year. Now, not a great passer, didn't have a lot of assists, and didn't shoot well. I'll give you that. But I think the discourse needs to be a little more honest about him, because the way people talk about him, you think he's terrible. So there's that. But he also is in a position where it's gonna be kind of his team. And I think because he's the guy who's coming back. He's the fourth year senior. He's what everybody wants in a Carolina player. And if he is able to produce just a little bit, more efficiently from a scoring standpoint, maintain that defensive focus, and then just have, I would say, moderate gains as it comes to assist rate, court vision, and then 3-point shooting, you're talking about a good player. Now, uh, granted, that is a lot to ask in one offseason to say, hey, become a better passer and a better 3-point shooter. But we've seen it done multiple times. Elliot Cadeau just did it for Carolina. So I think Trimble is going to be my answer for like, who's the X factor, who's the person with the most potential to make a leap, who's the person who, if they're playing well, Carolina can do well. Like, the answer to that is all going to be Seth Trimble for me, because if he can be the early season version of himself more often than not, that changes a lot for UNC, because right now the idea is like, well, they don't have a go-to scorer. They don't have a guy who can go get you a bucket whenever it's needed. They're replacing RJ Davis and all this scoring with, Kyan Evans and Seth Trimble. So if he can just be a little bit better version of himself, then I think that mitigates some of the losses that they had and will help out everybody else on the roster. So for me, it's like I said, the next 6 months, it's going to be, the answer is going to be Seth Trimble every single time.
I mean, maybe I just put that up on a crawl before I ask you any question for the next little while, and just maybe we just create that pattern, right? That just becomes our banter for the next little while.
Because I mean, to what Sean said, what you're doing with this roster, but what you're doing with this roster is it's basically a 6-leg parlay that you're trying to hit, because you're saying Jonathan Powell and Henry Vasar and Jaron Stevenson and Kyan Evans and Seth Trimble, those 5 guys, and then just add in James Brown and Jaydon Young. They all have to make a leap in the same year. So you're looking at like plus 3,200 odds or something. Now, that's for this team to be the best possible version of itself. If 3 or 4 guys make a leap, I still think it can be a good team. They are missing some things, but I think they have enough there that if a couple of guys take leaps, that they can do some things. But again, it's going to be a team, I think, that looks a lot different. And I think their hope is that the sum of the parts is better than the individual pieces. And it is a more balanced roster. I don't think you can argue with that. So that's kind of the positive outlook. But to me, it all is going to hinge on Seth Trimble, and that's a lot of pressure to put on one person.
But he's a senior.
But he's a senior. But especially considering kind of the ominous cloud hanging over UNC and what this year could mean if certain things happen. But I think it's on his shoulders, and we'll see if he can carry it.
Yeah, and it'll be fun to lean into that. And want to reiterate, and this is probably what I will put on the crawl for the next little while, is that the roster's not done. We're not saying that North Carolina is going out to sign 30 new guys as soon as the draft is over. That's not what we're saying. But we can't say with certainty. I'm trying to use some of Sherrell's little words here, Sean. Can you tell? We can't say with certainty, with dual confirmation, that this roster is complete, and that's why I think folks that are still kind of hand wringing. I understand last year was a tough offseason to go into, knowing North Carolina has deficits in the post. But before we can actually really fully analyze what the starters and the depth are going to look like on this roster, we got to make sure it's a complete roster, and that'll come with some time. Boys, I appreciate it as always. You guys are great. I'm thankful for y'all being on the show tonight and for coming prepared and helping to drag your host through it. So glad you guys are here. I hope that everybody has a great week, great evening, and we will be back very, very soon. I want to shout out to John Siegley for producing, to Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring. Sherrell, Sean, thank you guys so much. Shout out to everybody listening. If you have not, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review on Pods, on YouTube, wherever you get it. Make sure you do that. We'll appreciate it. We'll talk to y'all very, very soon here on the Coast to Coast Podcast on InsideCarolina.com. Tell your mother I said hello.